Hey everyone, my name's Jonathan, and for today's special installment of the IAA podcast, I'll be speaking with Alex Gamble. Alex is an immersive mixing engineer based out of Union Sound Company in Toronto, and he's responsible for a number of recent Dolby Atmos music releases, including high-profile projects such as FKA Twigs' latest album EUSEXUA and Envy of None's Stygian Wavz. So without further ado, here's my interview with Alex.
You're listening to the Immersive Audio Album Podcast.
Please listen with headphones for the best spatial experience. I mean, really, my first question is, in as much detail as you want to get into, how did you get involved in the sort of music engineering space and with
Sure.
mixing in Dolby Atmos?
Sure. Yeah. So I've been working as an audio engineer just over a decade now. I I got started, I mean, before that even, I used to play in bands in my teens and 20s and pretty quickly got more interested in the recording process than I actually did in the music making process. I mean, I still play music all the time. I play guitar mostly casually once in a while on recordings, but that's was my first foray into music. But it was like in my 20s where I was playing in bands that one of them got a bit serious and we decided to go rent a studio, and just the first time I walked in, I was hooked. I mean, this was something I knew right away that I wanted to do. And it kind of intersected with some other stuff that was going on with me at the time as well, because music engineering actually wasn't my first profession. Before I got into this professionally, I was actually a mechanical engineer. So I went to a university. I did a proper undergraduate degree to become a mechanical engineer. I worked professionally for engineering firms for 5 years or maybe more. Like I got to a point where I could, stamp documents and say this design drawing is engineering, it's a sound engineering and it can be built. And so I did that. So I already had a very technical mind. I had an analytical mind. I mean, I got into engineering because I was strong at physics. I was strong at math. I really like problem solving, uh, things involving how systems work together and connect and intersect with other systems. It's something I always had a knack for. And so going into mechanical engineering seemed like a natural thing, and I was good at it. But there was this other part of me that was always interested in music, and I loved playing in bands and I loved playing music, and I just couldn't really kick that. I couldn't live with that just being a hobby. And then when I walked into a studio for the first time, it just clicked. It was like this is where I belong. Like this takes that musical creative side that is it's just this fire burning in me and connects it with this analytical side that I've always been good at. Like until that point, I always used to be, it's going to be one or it's going to be the other. And, realizing that I could sit on the other side of the glass and turn the knobs and move the faders was a big revelation for me. And so, it kicked off like a process of kind of figuring out that that's actually what I wanted to do. Eventually I went to an audio school for it. Um, you know, I went there in my late 20s. I think it was like 27. So, maybe later to get into it than a lot of people do this professionally. But, better late than never. And, rest is history. Like I've been working in the industry for like over 10 years now, various capacities, like started as an intern at a studio, built my way up to assistant, house engineer, freelance for a little while. But in these last almost 5 years now, Dolby Atmos has become a big part of what I do. Um, I saw that I had that same sort of fire lit in me again when I discovered that Dolby Atmos was a thing. And just learning about it, how it works, how you deliver audio for it, and just how you can engineer these really emotionally moving experiences for people. It really it spoke to me right away. And as a technically minded person, I wasn't scared of the challenge of figuring out how to do it. In fact, it excited me a lot, and it like reinvigorated my passion for being in this field in the first place. And so it just kind of seemed like a natural place to go. So I've been doing that pretty heavily over the last 4 years. It's become a bit of a niche for me. I still work a lot in stereo too, though. It's a big part of what I do as well. But in many circumstances, people have come to know me as the Atmos guy and send me their stuff to bring into immersive, and it's work I love to do.
So if you're doing a stereo project for somebody, you'll probably tell them like, well, I could give you an Atmos mix too.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's definitely a value that I can add to the process. And it's great when I can get to do both because I know the production really intimately. And traditionally these days, people are still doing their stereo mixes and masters first, and then doing the Atmos version. There's a few exceptions, but 99% of the stuff is being done that way. And so for that reason, as the stereo mixer, depending on the project, you might be adding a lot of creative input at that phase. Like sometimes multi-tracks come into me pretty raw, and you really need to create what the vision is at the mixing stage. And so when you go into the Atmos mix, you already have that knowledge of what the intentions were. Sometimes when you're just doing the Atmos mix, it can be a blessing and a curse because when I get sent a finished stereo product, I get to hear it for the first time and have my original take on it. So there's that, which can be a positive, but a bit of it is a bit of mind reading. You're hearing these sounds and you're thinking like, okay, I imagine if, for this sound, you might have wanted it to be positioned this way, or maybe moving or something like that. So, the more you do, the better at guessing you get, but certainly when you get to do both, it can be a real advantage for sure.
But going back to what you were saying, that your background is in like true engineering, and then later you got into sound engineering. But so you probably understand the mechanics of like actually constructing a studio and the considerations as far as like acoustic treatment and those kind of things.
Man, it's funny, the room I'm in now. So I moved into this room full time to mix in under a year ago, but my history with this facility actually goes back to my very beginnings in the industry. So the building I'm in now is called Union Sound Company. So this is their like mix room. I'm like the full-time tenant in here. So this is my space to do mixes in. There's a mastering room as well. And then they've also got like one of the best like multi-track facilities in Canada, like got a vintage Neve console,
Oh, okay.
all like the, plugins that you use from UAD and Wavz. They got the real thing from the original serial numbers, all that sort of stuff. It's an amazing space. But all that to say, my first gig out of audio school was to actually intern here, and the place wasn't even built yet. And so I actually, to further that, I actually got to help finish the build of this space. And actually, the room I'm in now, this mixing room, this was like the first paid gig they offered me after I interned with them for a little while. So they finished the main multi-track room, and they were just eager to get to work and start booking bands. But this room was just, a bunch of drywall and studs, and that's it. And
Oh,
they
wow.
said, well, you you saw what goes into building the main room. Here's the plans. Here's a hammer and a saw and a bunch of insulation. Wear a long sleeve shirt, and can you do this? And I went to town. So I actually built this room, all the treatment and everything 10 years ago. So it's kind of this full circle thing to now, having worked here for the first 5 years of my career and then freelanced a bit. And now that I'm kind of mixing freelance full time, this room came up and it's just like, sure, I'll take it.
And the Atmos installation, I assume, was done later. Like originally, when it was built 10 years ago, it was just like a regular.
No, it didn't.
Yeah,
Atmos wasn't a thing.
yeah.
Nobody was thinking about Dolby Atmos when they were building studios 10 years ago. It just was. I mean, some people were thinking of 5.1 surround and 7.1 surround, but ceiling speakers were definitely not a thought. And it made it a challenge to install those ceiling speakers when I moved in here. So when I moved in here in November of last year, I was the first person to put Dolby Atmos in the room. So, but it was handy. I was looking at my phone pictures from 10 years ago and being like, oh yeah, there's a stud there I could attach to it. I just got to take this panel off and do that. So I had the advantage of knowing what was underneath the wall. So that was handy.
So getting into like the mechanics of working in Atmos, I always ask people this, like when it comes to sort of how you arrange the parts in the space, like what is your kind of philosophy?
Right. It really depends. I mean, first thing I want to do is I just want to hear the music, understand what it is. If I'm able, have a conversation with the producers, have a conversation with the artist, and just sit down and listen to it in two speakers and just understand what the music is, what the lyrical content is, aesthetically, what its personality is. That's the first thing. I mean, I can do anything in this format. I can position things anywhere. I can design these sequenced movements that sync up to the beat, but it's not about just using music as an excuse to flex my muscles in the format. It's the format serves the music. So that's the first thing. Sit and listen to it, understand what it is. And it can, how I treat it can sit on a variety of points on a spectrum. There was one that I did a couple months ago that was very like traditional kind of roots bluegrass sort of stuff. And it was, acoustic guitar and upright bass, vocals, and a few other auxiliary sounds. But it sounded to me like they wanted the sound of a artist and their backing band on a stage. And so I made it that. I didn't necessarily think it would have served the music right if I started just arbitrarily placing sounds around me, if that's not what the aesthetic was. But there's things you can do that utilize the speakers around you and the speakers above you that make you feel more engaged as a listener. It can make you feel like you're in the crowd at the Grand Ole Opry watching this artist on stage and things like that. You can create these really realistic three-dimensional sound stage that doesn't necessarily put the direct sound into the surround speakers, but just creates an environment for you to be in. The other end of the spectrum is something like, let's say the FKA Twigs mix that I got to do, where there was a lot of very natural sound in it. So for example, Twigs's vocals oftentimes were really dry. There was some effecty moments in it, but like the title track of the album, really dry vocal. And so that I'm hearing that they're going for the sound of a human being addressing you with their lyrical message. And those sort of sounds I like to keep in front of me, for the same reason that I'm facing you during this conversation. It's just human nature that, somebody who's delivering a message to you is on the opposite side of you and facing back at you. So that's where I like to put vocals. But then there's all these like very surreal sounds that trigger these interesting parts of your imagination. And I just kind of slowly spread those around the room until the room filled up a little bit. Not so much to make it gimmicky, because I didn't want to make it, again, I didn't want to make it about, look at what Dolby Atmos can do. I want to say, let me use this tool to highlight the music that you've made. So there's a fine line, but definitely with that one, with a lot of electronic music in general, I'm taking a lot of those auxiliary elements like, ethereal sounding background vocals or auxiliary synths or like sound effect moments, and I'm placing them in different portions of the sound field and filling the room up a little bit and just trying to engage people's imaginations in a different way. And so that's kind of one extreme of it. And then sometimes it sits somewhere in the middle. So, again, it is a bit of a guessing game because this format is new for so many people. A lot of the time I'm doing an Atmos mix for somebody who's getting their first Atmos mix done ever. And so they don't know what they want yet. And I'm usually in a position to show them something, say, hey, it could be this. And then we kind of take that and branch out from there.
I mean, and it's made more complex by the fact that you don't know how people are going to be listening to it.
There's that as well. Yeah, I mean, there's so many variables to this. I mean, now so many people are listening on headphones now, especially like the Apple Music crowd. Sometimes you have an idea of what kind of crowd is going to take to it. For example, there's this band Envy of None. Talked about them before. That they knew they wanted to press it to Blu-ray and to have it on your platform. So immediately that was a signal to me that they're targeting an audience who really values the speaker experience. And so we really wanted to prioritize that. I have the band in this room and hearing it on speakers and making sure that they felt like it represented their music properly. But yeah, it can be a variable. Like some people could be listening to it on AirPods. Some people could be listening to it on, Tidal with a regular set of headphones. So there's so many ways it can be experienced, and new ways are being invented all the time. So
yeah,
you're just gonna have to do your best and hope that new ways to experience the music that come around are honoring what I created in this space. I think actually Dolby themselves is doing a great job of making sure that the quality is upheld when new experiences come around.
Well, people often say the reason why 5.1 music didn't really catch on was because the only way you could listen to it is on a system with 5 speakers.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, yeah, Immersive cracks that all open, especially with the idea of audio objects. I mean, even set aside the whole immersive thing. I mean, that's cool that I can put sounds around me, and I love that. And I think it creates some really cool emotional experiences. But the idea of object-based mixing is one of the things that really drew me to this. Like, it just makes a lot of sense to me because in 5.1, like, that's channel-based. So when I deliver a mix in 5.1, it's a 6-channel mix, one for each speaker and subwoofer. But with the Dolby Atmos mix, it could be 10 channels, it could be 50 channels, it could be 128 channels. And each channel is an object, and that object just contains whatever the audio of that object is, and then instructions to say, hey, put the vocal in front of me. And then instructions to say, hey, put the, that cool spacey synth above me and behind me. And I think that's cool. It's like a document of how I intend the music to be experienced. And it opens the door to innovation. And it's my hope that cool, new, innovative ways keep emerging to be able to experience what I'm creating in spaces like this.
It's interesting, like when you're like someone in my position who gets sent a lot of these ADM files, and people have different approaches into how they utilize the bed and the objects.
Yeah.
The one thing I'm seeing that's more common is people use what they call these object beds, where there are just objects placed in the locations where the speakers are. And
one per speaker.
The panning just sort of goes through them.
Yep.
And I think probably the reason for doing that is because they can make a master bus and probably write automation to that. And then there are other examples, like I would say with yours, with the Envy of None, there are some moments where you can literally see the objects moving around, where you're doing like music pan or automation or something like that.
Definitely, there's a lot of that going on. The latter, what you described, is definitely my approach. I'm sure you probably saw that, having ingested the ADMs for that. But I know people that use beds or object beds or whatever you want to call them, and they do great work.
At the end of the day, the consumers don't see the ADM, so it just matters how it sounds. But it's interesting from a behind the scenes perspective.
I'm sure you got a pretty interesting perspective on that. I mean, as far as ADMs go, I only get to see mine, and then, whatever a few like colleagues send me, right? I'm sure your perspective is really interesting. Let me put it back to you. What do you see most? Does it kind of run the gamut, or are most people using beds, or most people using objects, or
Most commonly, I would say it's a mix of bed and objects. I mean,
is it?
you have to use the bed to get to the sub channel anyway. So
Yeah.
there's always an LFE send even on all object mixes. But
Mhm.
it's honestly there after there've been this has been going on maybe for 5 years, like you said. It kind of started during the
Yep.
pandemic when Tidal launched and then Apple launched, and there still isn't really any standardization. I think people have realized there are certain things that don't work. Like it usually doesn't work to put the vocal anywhere other than the front, other than
True.
extreme
Yeah.
circumstances. It usually doesn't work to put like the kick drum anywhere other than the front, though I have
Yep.
encountered some mixes where the drums are in the back or in the side or something.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's interesting to see how it evolves. I don't think there should be like a rule book that you have to follow.
I don't think so either. I mean,
Yeah,
there's no rule book for stereo, but we do have
there are
decades of
conventions. Yeah,
experience that has led to certain conventions. And sometimes all it takes is just a certain mix to get really famous from a really popular band to define that aesthetic. I mean, look at something like heavy metal. We're talking stereo now, but like, Metallica's Black album had a very characteristic kick drum, which sounds nothing like a kick drum in real life. But every heavy metal album that followed, even today, has a kick drum that sounds like that. And so I we're very much in the infancy of immersive audio when it comes to popular music. Um, and I want to specify popular music because we've got a lot of music that came before that from people like, Morten Lindberg and producers in that vein who have really perfected the craft before us, Apple Music noobs got onto it 5 years ago and acted like we're trailblazers. So we're in fact not. People have been researching this and doing great work in this for a long time. And I think it's anybody getting into this should learn about the history and learn where it's been, because you'll find some ways to build that into your approach to mixing or recording or whatever. But can't remember how I got on that, but I
it's
think it's
funny because
important to
it's
know where you've been to know where you're going,
yeah,
right?
it's true like what you say that this for the first time this is where like a lot of stuff is being mixed for this format kind of en masse. And
In math,
it's
for sure.
unusual that like every new record has an Atmos mix.
It
Like
is.
when I got into surround, it was kind of like maybe 10 years ago. It would be like there'd be reissues of old albums where they'd go back and do a 5-1 mix. You think of these
Exactly.
bands like, Pink Floyd or like Jethro Tull, those like these specialty things. And those
Yep.
kind of still exist now. But it's funny, like a lot of these older records, like you look at something like Dark Side of the Moon, every time they've come up with a multi-channel thing, it's been remixed for it. There was a quad
Yeah.
version of it. There was a 5.1 version of it. Now there's an
Yeah.
Atmos version of it. Yeah.
I've been meaning to get my hands on some old quad recordings. I only realized recently that quadraphonic vinyl was a thing, and I wanna get a setup in here so I can listen to some of those old quad recordings.
It's pretty fascinating how they were able to do it on vinyl.
I know it is, and it's a shame it didn't catch on. But from what I understand, there was so many different ways you could press it and play it back that maybe became a bit confusing.
Yeah,
But
well, to go into this because I do find it interesting.
yeah,
Essentially, the main method, the way it would work, is they would use like a matrix process to sort
right,
of create like a stereo fold with the phase affected of the rear channels. So when you would play it back through like a decoder, like a little box that has two RCA jacks in and four out,
yeah,
it would try to like split the mix back up again. But
right. I
you
see.
would lose separation between the speakers.
I mean, I think that stuff's so cool, and I love learning about the history of this stuff. And I mean, right now I feel like we're definitely in an unprecedented time when it comes to surround music. Because, like you said, every new release from major labels has a Dolby Atmos version with it. That never happened with previous iterations of surround music. So, certainly, like the commercial circumstances that are creating that exist now. and it's never existed before. And it's created tons of opportunities. It's created tons of challenges, and it's grown faster than I think people's understanding of what it is has become. So I think it's our duty as enthusiasts and as creators to help build that understanding for people,
No,
because
absolutely.
the work is getting done, and there's some great people out there doing some really amazing work. And yeah, I think it's important to educate artists on what it is, how it can play into their creative process. And like I said, a lot of the people who I'm doing immersive mixes for, I'm doing that their first immersive mix that they've ever done. And so, I try to involve people as much as I can so that when they go into the record their follow up, they're thinking about this ahead of time, and maybe they might make a few different decisions, which is going to lead to an even better immersive product in the future.
Absolutely. Now, you mentioned the Envy of None record before, which I think is kind of
Hmm.
a good example of what you were calling like the middle between two extremes, where
Exactly. Yep.
the mix on that record, because a lot of the instrumentation is organic, like there are real drums on that album, it's not quite as crazy as the Twigs record. But there are some things you've done, like where there's like a delay on the vocal, you'll swirl that around. There are
Yep.
some different layers of like guitar and synth and things where you were able to sort of spread those out around the room. So if you want to kind of just talk about how that project came to your doorstep and working with the bands, yeah.
Yeah. So I got to meet Alex originally at the studio here. He was here with another band called the Rio Statics, who just finished up a record that features him on it, and they were doing a few recordings here. And I knew that band because I'd worked on their previous record. So when they came in for the session, I made sure to say hi. Met Alex, and he said, "Hey, I heard you have an immersive room." And so when there was a break in the session, he came in and checked out the room and loved it. Played him some stuff that I had worked on, and one thing led to another. And he's telling me, "Hey, I've got this band Envy of None, and we want an immersive mix done." And so we started with one song just to kind of feel things out. It was the song "Handle with Care," and yeah, I mean it really was that process that I described of just really trying to understand what it is in two channels, because the stereo masters were done already, and just get behind the message of what was being done, get behind the aesthetics of what it was. And again, I think you nailed it when you said that it was a bit of a hybrid approach. There's organic elements like Maya's lead vocals, very dry, very upfront. So I'm going to put them in that place that makes me engage with her lyrics the most and engages with that sense of dialogue the most. But as the track grows and expands, there's these different ethereal elements that happen. Um, there's all this cool stuff swirling around in the bridge of that song, and so the room opens up a little bit there. In a lot of ways, it's almost like a choreography gig if you think about it, because the sounds are built, and they're built on the back of one of the band members, Alfio Annabellini, who's a great mixing engineer himself, who did the stereo mixes for this. But he's built the blueprint for what the production is and how the record's supposed to sound. So it's my job to almost stage the immersive presentation. So it's kind of like a choreography gig in a sense. So, I could fill up all the speakers all the time, but it's a very dynamic track. And so my thinking was to mirror those dynamics with immersive presentation. So in verses, when it's very sparse, have things more to the front of the room and leave a little bit of open air. And so that when things get bigger and expand and climax, that I can fill the room up and it feels like a big climax. So that song, I did a lot of that. And there's a lot of that going on throughout the record. But it covers a lot of different ground, genre wise, stylistically, and things like that. So it wasn't necessarily one uniform approach for every song, but there were a few things that were in common. Maya's vocals, for example, unbelievable on this record. I mean, she's so talented, not just with her lead vocals, but on every song, she's got 25 or 30 background vocal layers. Like, you might not notice it right away just listening to everything as a whole, but get to go through and solo everything and understand what's in the production, she's submitting a lot, like double layers, triple layers, quadruple layers, additional harmonies, oohs and
And in
ahs.
the delivery they gave you, that stuff wasn't like already comped into like they actually gave you all the separate tracks. Like how much of it
Yeah,
was grouped? Yeah.
I actually I got the Pro Tools sessions from Alfio, the stereo engineer and band member as well. He just gave me the Pro Tools sessions and said go to town, and I got all the plugins I need to make sure it opened up, and basically got to start from where he finished off from a mixing perspective. So it was great. I could separate things out as much or as little as I wanted. Um, that in itself becomes a challenge because, as you've noticed, and as I said, I use almost entirely objects for my mixes. So that means no mix bus. So if there was a song with a bunch of mix bus processing going on, I had to figure out a way to create that same effect, but using individual objects. So, a lot of the time is spent just listening in stereo, breaking things out. I've got a few like hotkeys that I've built up with this application called SoundFlow. It can kind of take control of my Pro Tools rig and do a bunch of like tedious operations automatically. So if I want to say, hey, put this mix bus compressor on every stem, I just tell SoundFlow to do it and I go make a coffee. And then when I come back, my plugins are all inserted. So, there's things like that. But at the same time, some of the things that work in a stereo mix aren't necessarily going to give you the same result in an immersive mix. One example is like mix bus compression. Like I know a lot of people like to use these beds so that they can access a tool like that. Take one compressor, put it on your whole mix so that when the kick drum hits, the whole mix ducks and pumps and things like that. I find that's a very effective tool in stereo. I don't think it's very effective in immersive audio. It can be when there's like very clear musical intent behind it. So for example, like in the Twigs record, one of the first things you hear is a kick drum and it's ducking like some kind of air and reverb. And the reverb sort of ducks down in volume and then pumps back up with the kick drum. So that's like a very clear musical intent. Like the track doesn't groove anymore if you don't do that.
So it's being used like a mix effect and not just to kind of like level out the track. Yeah.
Exactly. I find just taking things and leveling it out with a compressor and immersive, it kind of, I don't know, just it never sounds right to me when I know how to do it. Even with objects, I've got a method figured out where I use this like creative side chaining to do it, but I've never really loved the sound of it. So what I do instead is, you kind of break it down into just thinking about what it is you're trying to achieve. So what does a mix bus compressor achieve in stereo? It's trying to glue sounds together. It's trying to level the mix out and sort of even out the dynamics a little bit, but also create this almost like connectivity between the sounds so that, that guitar that's way out on the left speaker doesn't sound completely disconnected from stuff that's in the center of the mix. Like, it's really effective in stereo. But when I do it in immersive, if I put that guitar on the other side of the room and there's a kick drum over here, it all just feels weird to me that guitar is like ducking in volume when the kick drum goes. It's so out there and it's so isolated. So what I do instead is I'll use things like these immersive reverbs. So there's one by this company, Liquid Sonics, I love, called Cinematic Rooms. And what I'll often do is I'll just tuck the tiniest little bit of that in there, like not even enough that you hear it, but just almost create an atmosphere for the mix, like create a room for the mix to be in. And it just becomes this like nice connective tissue from things that are maybe on one extreme side of the room to things that are on another extreme side of the room. So again, like I'm doing that to create glue. I know how to create glue in stereo, but it's like a different technique to do that in immersive, at least for my own aesthetics. So there's a lot of that going on. Like I want to make sure I'm honoring the stereo production if that's what's been done first, but that doesn't necessarily mean using the exact same tools. Sometimes a different tool gets you closer to honoring that production intent when you bring it into a new format like this.
Now, like a question I've always had, like I'll give you a scenario. Like say like the bus compression is being used to like shape the tone of something. Like
Sure.
you have like all your drums are feeding like a API 2500 or something.
Hmm.
And then like in Atmos, say you wanted to like try to create some separation between the drums, like you wanted to like move the overheads up a little bit. Like if you have all these separate mics and you want to try to move things around. And like sometimes that works, sometimes it doesn't. It depends on
Yep.
the music. But like if you were to take all the tracks and just put them one by one through the compressor, like you bounce your hi-hat and your snare and your kick and whatever, is the effect of running all the tracks through the compressor separately the same as when they're all hitting it at once? Like, isn't it
Not
kind of a different thing?
not quite. There's
Yeah.
two factors to something like that. Like if you're running through a piece of gear that has a really strong characteristic to it, um, yeah, running sounds individually might not do that, especially if that piece of gear or that plugin uh, has like a saturation
Mm,
characteristic to it. Because with those sort of tools, the more sound you feed through it, the more it saturates individually. So if you take like a really quiet hi-hat track, it's not going to
yeah.
saturate very much if you just run it by on its own. But if it's being run through with a kick drum that's loud and booming and a snare drum that really cracks, it's going to impart the characteristic that they provide to the unit on that track that's quiet. So there's a bit of that, right? Like if you really need that sound and you can't get it back, then maybe you do need to just treat that element as a group and go with it and find other tools to bring it around the room. Or it's just something to keep in the back of your mind. Like, I've done a lot of stereo mixing. I've engineered recordings in stereo with vintage gear, so I know what the stuff does. And so I'm considering all of that. Like I might listen to a mix and say, wow, those drums sound really pumping, but the engineer sent me individual kick, individual snare, individual hat. And when I put them all together, it sounds really clean. So going to make a note of that. And if I feel like I need it for my immersive mix, I'm just going to dirty that stuff up individually a little bit more so that I can get back what they created when they ran everything through the gear, summed together. So that's a totally valid thought and a totally valid consideration. And again, it's about understanding what the intent of the production is and using whatever tools you need to get there. It's not about using the exact tool. Like that exact tool will get me there, don't get me wrong, but you can use other tools to do it too. It's more about understanding the intent and going after it from a different angle, perhaps to get that intent in a better way for this format.
Now, a lot of the time, I really most of the time, from what I've been told from people, the information that you get to do the Atmos mix is stereo elements because it's probably been bounced through a master bus. So it sort
Yeah,
of begs the question where you're working with all this paired information, what do you do with the center channel? And
sure.
on a lot of vintage mixes, like I'm a huge fan of like Bob Clearmountain's mixing. And a lot of the stuff he's done, like of old records from the 80s, they do have mono elements they could mix to the center channel. You know, like
Yeah.
lead vocals or like guitar solos and things. But on a lot of these new records where everything is stereo, a lot of times people just don't use it because it,
Yep.
yeah. So how do you kind of approach that?
Well, that's back to the whole mid side thing that I
Yeah.
mentioned. I will use a bit of center channel for some vocals and then sometimes some drums. But again, like if it's a vocal with some stereo effects on it, if you just take that one stem and then sort of start folding it into your center channel, you lose that sense of width that the original engineer would have baked into the stereo mix. And I I've done enough stereo mixes to know that you work hard to achieve that width. And and it's not my place as an immersive mixer to lose what they worked so hard for.
Mm.
So that mid side trick is something that I do to use the center channel. I'll take that mid separated version of whatever the stem is, and I'll feed a bit of that into the center channel because that isolated mid version has no width on it. So you can put some of that into the center and just keep your sides to the extreme left and right. and not lose any width whatsoever. You're just curating how much of that mid information goes into the center channel. So, using creative ways like that to engage the different channels is one of my approaches. My approach with the center channel is, for most mixes, I'm not heavily using it. It is getting used though, but I'm not putting like the entire vocal track, for example, into the center channel.
So you're not a fan of the naked vocals in the center.
Not for home audio listening. That said, for cinematic, it sounds amazing. So for Justin Gray's album, for example, which I did a bunch of engineering on, I got to be around for some of the cinematic mixes of that album. And we went to a soundstage in town called Company 3, and we got to hear how the album translated in a cinematic presentation of Dolby Atmos. And the center channel in a cinematic context is a whole different beast. You kind of get punished for not using it in that context, mostly because the center channel just sounds so good. Like it's, when you're mixing a movie, like that's where the voice goes. You just don't put it anywhere else. It just goes in the center. So in most cinemas, the center channel is a really amazing full range channel. And it just sounds different in a cinema because you're sitting so much further away from it. Like in my studio, like my center channel is right there. It's, only a few feet away from me. So, sound doesn't really have a chance to disperse around the room and reflect and fill the space before it reaches my ear in my room. Whereas in a cinema, it comes out of the center channel and it goes into this big, beautiful treated space and really fills things out. So it sounds great in the cinema. So on Justin's record, on the cinematic mix, there's tons of stuff going to the center channel. Almost all of the soloists are pretty dedicated center channel on his cinematic mix of his album. I forget if he changed that for the home theater mix. I think he might have a little bit, but
I would say you'd
have to ask him.
It's still pretty aggressive on the center, even in the home. Like on my 714, there's a lot of stuff coming out of there.
Yeah, but that said, it sounds pretty great. I mean, but one of the advantages of Justin doing his record is that he did the immersive mix first.
Yes.
And so he got to design the listening experience for this format. Whereas when you're doing the immersive mix after a stereo mix, that's the blueprint. And it can be very jarring to take something was using a phantom left-right center and then slamming it into one speaker. So it often doesn't work in those situations. But with Justin's, you could just go with what sounded best in immersive. And then the challenge became the opposite thing of matching the stereo mix to the feeling of the immersive mix after the fact, which is really unusual these days. But Justin's on another planet when it comes to this stuff. So,
well, it's so interesting, and I talked to him about this last week. Like, most people are talking about with this format the idea of like adapting things that were not meant to be heard this way. Right. And that's not to say like it doesn't work. Like generally, if you have a relatively layered production, it will translate well into Atmos. But chances are the people who engineered the stereo record were not thinking about Atmos, even with newer records. Certainly in the case of like legacy stuff that's being remixed into Atmos. Definitely. But with Justin's record, it was conceived for it from the start. So it's a whole different kind of set of rules than typically. Totally.
I mean, we even got to rethink our recording techniques on that one and think of ways to capture it so that it just kind of went into immersive. And it was a whole orchestration process on his part too. Like, we had an immersive microphone array in the middle of the studio that was just set up all the time. And, part of what Justin was doing as the producer on this was thinking ahead of time about, okay, where do I want this overdub or this sound to hit in the immersive field? And we would simply just position them around the microphone array where he wanted them to go in the mix. And so thinking about that stuff that early in the process was very advantageous. We also built an immersive array in the control room of the studio we used so that we could actually monitor the results in real time. And that was pretty amazing, not just from an engineering perspective, but from a creative perspective. Like when when Justin would bring a musician in for that recording, you know, we'd send them out into the live room, get them to record some parts, but we would make sure early on in the day to just like say, okay, those are some nice takes. Come on in the room, and then we would play them what they just did in immersive, and it was really eye-opening to see how musicians who were hearing immersive audio for the first time in that moment would react to what they were hearing. And most of the reactions were, well, A, oh my God, this is awesome. It's so cool. But B, now I've got more ideas for you. Like, and so many times people would go out and say, okay, record this, put it in the left speaker. Now we're going to record this layer, put it in the right speaker. And they would almost be composing themselves in immersive. And had we not conceived it that way from the ground up, those ideas never would have happened. And so it's my hope that, you know, as we move forward as a recording community, that more of those experiences can happen, because yeah, there's music that simply doesn't get made on that record if we weren't doing it with immersive audio from the beginning.
I mean, he told me like that for some of the solos, like they would be reamped in like another space with a like 16 channel mic array. Like
Yeah,
it was so far beyond like anything I've ever heard of. He told me one of the songs had over 1,000 tracks in the Pro Tools session.
Yeah, we ran out of Pro Tools groups during the recording session. I didn't know you could do that, but we did. We we reported all our findings to Avid and Dolby, being like, hey, you know that thing that you want everyone to do, like record immersively from the beginning? We did it, and here's what we could do, and here's what we couldn't do. And so, you know, we really pushed things hard. And I mean, I say I say that lightly. I mean, I spent a month with them doing the recordings of this, but you know, that was maybe 1% of the work. Justin took things so far with the mixing, with the production, with the editing, and I mean, he knocked it out of the park with that. Hats off to him. I mean, it's really inspiring to get to be around somebody that driven and when with that deep of an artistic vision, because the work is one thing, but actually really presenting art is another, and they go hand in hand. And sometimes when you work so hard you forget about the art. Sometimes when you're thinking about the art so much you forget about the work. And he's one guy that can just do both so seamlessly, and it's really inspiring.
Now, I always ask this question, but if there was any record, old or new, you could do an Atmos mix of, what would you choose?
Oh boy.
Yeah.
Old or new?
And it doesn't have to be one. You could say like a few. Yeah.
Oh man. Dolby Atmos mixes, old or new? Man, that is a tough one. I wasn't prepared to answer that. I mean, I will say, like, one of the interesting things about getting into Dolby Atmos is that it intersects with another love of mine, which is progressive rock. Because I've noticed that so many people that are into prog rock love Dolby Atmos. I didn't have it on my bingo card when I got into this, but
I would say it's purely because of Steven Wilson. But
yeah, I mean, Steven Wilson does some amazing work in the format. Like, he's a huge inspiration of mine as well. Like, his mixes are so engaging and so full and just really tasteful. But I mean, I'm a huge prog nerd. I would love to get my hands on, like, you know, Yes albums, for example, or Genesis or something like that. I mean, I've always been a huge Rush fan. So, you know, getting to work with Alex on the Envy of None record was pretty exciting for me that way. But, you know, any old 70s prog rock I'd love to get my hands on, even just to see the multi-tracks. I think that would be really cool. For newer stuff, yeah, I'm trying to think. I mean, so much new stuff already has an Atmos mix to it. Guilty pleasure. I really love. You're gonna laugh at me going from progressive rock to this, but I really love the music from that K-pop Demon Hunters soundtrack. Have you heard this?
I've heard the name, but I'm not like immediately familiar with it. But I
the
mean,
songs the
the
songs are actually incredible, and they don't have an Atmos mix yet. So I would love to get my hands on that one and do it, because I got so many ideas for how that could be done. That's a new one
I mean
that I'd love to do.
like a K-pop production is like, I mean, it's like Twigs on steroids.
That
Like
and
there's
that's my point.
yeah.
There's no reservations about genre or style or what's, cool. And not to say they're doing things that are uncool. They're just doing whatever they want in the moment, and I think that's awesome. And the songs on this record are just absolutely great. I actually haven't seen the movie yet, but I've listened to the music, and it's pretty spotless. And so something like that I'd love to do. Yeah, that kind of runs the gamut. I mean, I'd love to do something from every genre, to be honest with you. Like I I kind of am a bit genreless when it comes to my music tastes. I'll listen to Bach and Cannibal Corpse in the same day, and it's not a big deal to me. So, whatever it is, throw it at me. I'll get behind what you're doing and try to realize it for you.
So I guess the last question I have for you is, can you talk about any stuff you've got coming out in Atmos or things people should look for? We talked about
Things
Twigs, we talked
coming
about
out.
Envy of None, but yeah.
I mean, most of the stuff I can't say too much about. I mean, I'm really excited about Justin's record.
Yeah.
Um, so he's been releasing some singles, and the full album is done. He's screened it in a few places to live audiences. And then the full album's going to be on streaming pretty soon. And I was involved in that as an engineer, so really, really excited about that one. Um, there's a record actually finished a while ago and is out now, but is still gaining a new audience, and new people are discovering it. It's called Time Spent Swimming by Selena Martin.
Okay.
It was actually the very first Dolby Atmos mix I did, and she actually dragged me into Dolby Atmos. I don't want to say dragged me into. It's not like I was unwilling. We sort of discovered it together when we were producing her record, and just kind of played around with the tools during the mixing process, and we both just decided right away that, okay, forget about stereo. We're doing the Atmos mix first.
Oh, okay.
And so that's one where we actually did Dolby Atmos first. And that album came out in 2022. The Atmos mix is out there currently. But she's still promoting the record. She's releasing a new music video for the album here really soon. I think more and more people are finding out about the story of how we put this thing together, and people who are really into immersive audio are usually really enthusiastic about finding out about music that's really using the technology as a conduit for its art. And Selena really, really did that. I mean, I can't really say that I'm in the situation that I'm in today if not for her inventiveness with Dolby Atmos at the moment that we both discovered it. And the results on that album are really cool, really interesting. I still love listening to it to this day, and new people are finding out about it all the time. In fact, I've been meaning to tell her about your platform.
I was just going to say, it sounds like
I,
something that,
I
yeah.
think it would be something that your audience would be really interested in hearing. So, I mean, maybe that's the one I gotta flag to Selena and say, hey, let's get it up here, because people are excited to hear it this way. So that's it's one that's been out for a while, but it's still getting promoted, and I still like to really point people to it because I think it's a really special record. The way we mixed it, it was almost like the naivety of what works and what doesn't was it was to our advantage, and I think the results are really cool. Maybe something I wouldn't have done today, knowing more about how things work, but I'm sure glad I didn't know as much as I did then, because I think the results are really cool because of it.
Yeah, I mean, I always like to ask people just like what they've done that's out there, because on Apple Music they don't tell you who mixed the albums.
Most of the time they don't.
Yeah.
Yeah, so you got to go look for it.
I mean, on your site you have a pretty detailed credits page, but not everybody does who's doing this kind of work.
Yeah,
so, yeah.
Yeah, I mean, for me, like that Selena Martin record is a cool one to check out. Anything that's on this really cool record label called Vinculum, they're spelled VNCLM.
Okay.
They're a record label that's been getting me to do Atmos mixes for them for a while. And they just give me carte blanche and say, go for it. I mean, that's a situation where they send me the stereo master, and that does indicate what they want the song to sound like, but they've kind of given me carte blanche and say, do cool, quote unquote, Atmosy things with it. And we've sort of built up an aesthetic over the years of doing mixes together that I love and that they love and that their artists love. And they're usually quite adventurous. So that's some stuff I would recommend people to check out that I've mixed. There's an artist called Sadie, spelled Sadye. They also have another artist called Flyana Boss. Yeah, you go check out their roster. Most of the stuff on there I've had my hands in doing Dolby Atmos mixes for, and there's some fun sounding stuff in there.
Yeah, I mean, part of the challenge with this stuff, I think, certainly, especially like for indie artists, not so much for the bigger labels, is like you have to give them a financial incentive to pay to do these mixes. Because
In some cases, yeah,
at the
yeah,
end of the day, like it goes to streaming. Like I think certainly playlist, you know, going on one of those like made for spatial audio playlists helps with promotion. But
for sure.
since there's no like physical product anymore, I can understand why people are skeptical about investing in the format. I mean, the best way to get people to go for it is to get them in the room and play it because it's cool.
You got it.
Because of the
You got it.
artistic
Then
sensibilities.
people understand what it can be, right?
Yeah.
I mean, even if most people are going to hear it on headphones, when you hear it in a system like this, it's undeniable. When it's done well, it can be really, really moving.
And part of what we're trying to achieve with this platform is that it's something that you can sell. You know,
Exactly.
like as opposed to just streaming it on Apple Music, the immersive mix is something like people could buy.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Which is why I like things like your platform. I mean, it's a great conduit for independent artists and even label artists to get a product into people's hands. I think more and more people are actually looking for that nowadays. Because everything feels so impermanent with streaming, and not to knock it. I mean, it's part of the reason why I'm doing this work at all.
It's the reason why it's happening. Yeah.
For sure. But there's certainly more to it than just that. It's nice to have something and say like I owned it and I supported the artist. So kudos to your platform for providing a way for people to do that. I think that's really cool.
Yeah, for sure.